Thank you for joining me on this video series examining the accuracy of missing 411 Eastern United States. Today we are looking at the section of the book dedicated to Missouri, Oklahoma, and Arkansas. There are 13 cases in this section, so this is a longer video than usual. As such, we'll just get right into it. Joshua Childers is up first. Josh, age 3 at the time, went missing on May 4th, 2009 from Arcadia, Missouri. Josh's mother thought he was inside the house playing, but discovered around noon that he had unlocked the back door and had apparently gone into the woods. The parents searched the immediate area, then called the sheriff. The area was very dense with vegetation, so searchers said that they couldn't see more than 20 feet in any direction. On the first day of searching, one of Josh's shoes was found about a mile from his house. A rainstorm hit the area that night and greatly hampered search efforts. On the third day, a lone searcher found Josh, groggy but alive, near a creek bed 3 miles from his home. He was dehydrated but in good condition, and he never explained how or why he went missing. Again, we see that notorious closing line from Paulides about how a child never explains how they went missing. What would he like them to say, I wonder? I wanted to go outside, so I did, then I got lost? Not exactly riveting news, but let's review. The first part of this case is very well reported. That or I just couldn't confirm the statements that were being made until we get to the very end. In addition to being dehydrated, Josh was also suffering from moderate hypothermia. Sometimes this is just rolled into exposure. And finally, the last point is especially humorous to me, because in this case, he actually does explain why he left. He says that he was going on a hike to see his grandmother. Charles Warren is up next. I have no idea why this case was even included in the book, but you'll see what I mean. Charles, who was 2 years old at the time, went missing on December 20th, 1935 from Hot Springs, Arkansas. It is believed that he went after his father, who had gone into the woods to cut down a Christmas tree. It was the third time in a year that he had gone missing. The National Guard was called, and they scoured the woods. The next day, Charles showed up at a neighbor's house, 4 miles away, asking for his father. The doctor said that enduring the cold was a miracle. He never said anything to his family about his disappearance. This case's inclusion is surprising to me because it's obvious, to me anyway, that what happened here, without looking into it, is just he left his house looking for his dad. And when he finally made it to a neighbor, he immediately asked for his dad. But let's review anyway. Charles went missing in 1936, not 1935. This made it hard to search for since there was a Charles Warren who died in December of 1935 that came up in a ton of results. As for the National Guard scouring the area, they did. There was 100 that responded and did indeed search the area. As for how far away the neighbor's house was, some people said 4, some people said 4 miles, and some people said 2.5. As for whether or not he said anything to his family about his disappearance, I don't know how Paulides can opine to know that, especially when just in this second point it says that it's believed that he went after his father, who had gone into the woods to cut down a Christmas tree. I think that pretty strongly implies that at some point he told somebody that he went out looking for his father. But let's just go ahead and move on to the next case. Florence Jackson. Florence, who was 4 years old at the time, went missing on September 6th, 1937 from Oak Grove, Arkansas. She was last seen by her grandfather as they walked on a trail in the woods. Halfway down the trail, she said that she wanted to go back to the car, and the grandfather let her go by herself. She didn't make it to the car. 3 days into the search, her shoes and stockings were found on a high ridge about half a mile from where she was last seen. The stockings were 15 yards apart, which Paulides makes a big deal of. Heavy rain hit the area. The next day, a farmer found Florence, naked and covered in burrs but alive, about 7 miles from where she went missing. Florence told the authorities that she had eaten wild grapes, tomatoes, and sheep sorrel. Doctors said that she was covered in scratches and had a low fever, but was otherwise okay. Her story to authorities was fanciful and made it hard to tell what was real and what were dreams. Mr. Paulides also cites some excerpts of her story, which include a couple that found her in the woods, let her stay the night, then kicked her out. Admittedly, that is very interesting if true. Let's see what we can find out. For the shoes, let me read 2 sections from an article. Quote, "The child, complaining that a pair of new shoes were blistering her feet," close quote, end quote, "she said her dress got wet and mussed up and that she threw it away," close quote. That makes the removal of clothes way less mysterious. Nearly every article I saw notes the blistered feet were the reason she started to go back to the car. Funny how Mr. Paulides leaves that out. I didn't see any articles that confirmed the 4th point about heavy rain hitting the area, but it's perfectly possible. In addition to the injuries that were noted in Paulides' version, the doctors also noted that she had a heart problem, a bruised hip, a lack of nourishment, and injured feet. Let's move on to the next case. Lloyd Hockett. Lloyd, who was 9 years old at the time, went missing on October 21st, 1945 from, I'm going to get this wrong, there's just no escaping it, Kiamichi Mountains, Oklahoma. He was with his uncle and dogs at the time hunting for squirrels. At one point, the dogs took off to chase a squirrel, with Lloyd and his uncle in tow. The uncle checked over his shoulder many times to make sure that Lloyd was following him. When the uncle arrived at the treed squirrel, he saw Lloyd was missing. He waited a while, but then went looking for him. When he couldn't find him, he called for help. Heavy rains hit the area as his search team assembled. 2 days into the search, soldiers from a nearby camp located Lloyd laying on the ground by a ridgeline 4 miles from where he was last seen. He was alive but unconscious. Unfortunately, however, he was pronounced dead at the hospital. The cause of death was listed as exposure. His body was noted to be badly bruised and clothing was torn. Mr. Paulides cites that 9-year-olds know to stay near creeks in the woods to avoid heavy brush that would damage clothing. He also says that Lloyd would have responded to his uncle when he called. Frankly, this case makes me a little angry at Mr. Paulides for twisting the whole thing like he does. The 3rd point is where we hit borderline deception. I read 19 news articles about this case, and none of them gave the version of events that are listed in Missing 411. Now, perhaps he's just misinformed or he was able to locate something some piece of source material that I was not. Just benefit of the doubt. But the version that I was able to find is that Lloyd's uncle left him behind to rest as the uncle continued on. When the uncle returned to the tree where he had left Lloyd, he was gone. As for the second to last point, it's not on the PowerPoint I have here, but I do want to point this out just because of the last point from Histine 411, which I do note there as well. But here's a quote from the doctors. Quote, his shirt had been torn from his back, the doctor said, by heavy underbrush through which he had fought his way. His hands, face, and chest were bruised, and the doctor said that the boy's eyes were swollen from crying. Close quote. So as you can see, the damage to the clothing was from the underbrush, and the bruising and such was also determined to not be from nefarious means. This was death by misadventure. Catherine Van Elst. Catherine, who was 8 years old at the time, went missing on June 16, 1946, from Devil's Den State Park, Arkansas. The family of 5 was renting a cabin there. After unpacking, Catherine's father took her and her siblings to a nearby dam. Catherine fell into a deep portion of the upper dam, where a stranger pulled her out and told her not to play in deep water. She listened and went to the area below the dam. This is where she was last seen. After a very short time, her siblings noticed that she was missing and notified her father, who in turn got a search going. 2 days later, the sheriff was in charge of search efforts and focused on the area beneath the dam because he thought that she had drowned. The pool beneath the dam was drained and she wasn't there. Efforts moved to look into the mountains and there was speculation that she was abducted. On the 22nd, or about a week later, a team was 7 air miles away searching and calling her name. As they pushed to the summit, they heard Catherine call out, "Here I am." She was still in her bathing suit and she was covered in scratches and bug bites. If she had followed the trails, she would have traveled dozens of miles. What he means is that if she had followed the trails that were in the mountain, the hiking trails, she would have had to zigzag, of course, through the mountain and would have traveled dozens of miles to get there if you add up all that distance. I'm not going to say that it's likely that she went in exactly straight line, but considering that she's covered in scratches and bug bites, presumably from not being on the trail, I don't know why this point is included. She was found downstream of the dam. Catherine said that she had slept on warm grass the first night but doesn't remember the other nights, though she did say that she found a cave high up and that she stayed there for a couple nights. Doctors released her after 2 days and said that she was in excellent condition besides some cuts and bruises as well as minor shock. Dehydration or malnutrition were never mentioned. Let's review. The first several points are correct, so we'll just move right on to the second part here. I saw that the pool was dragged, not drained, but yes, it was searched. Ultimately, it doesn't really matter considering. However, when we run into the point where she doesn't remember what happened, that's when we run into her first discrepancy. She never said that she couldn't remember. In fact, the article says that she was relating what had happened to her father when they were reunited. She even stated why she left in the first place. She was trying to walk back to the cabin. The doctors never said that she was in excellent condition. She said that she was doing, quote, good, close quote, and getting along nicely. But as for malnutrition not being a factor, while not mentioned directly, take a look at this picture that was included on nearly every news story, and compare that to after she recovered just a few days later. That's why it's comical to me that when other people have related this case just from Missing 411, they show this picture, which is easily found, by the way, saying, hey, look, here's a picture of the person who is missing, because I mean, that's what you do, right? And then they get to the part where it's like, oh, she wasn't malnourished, and you're looking at the picture like, so she's just naturally a skeleton? And it's often called out in those comments. You didn't realize what you were showing the whole time, but this case does also lend some insight to others based on the things that Paulides says that she can't remember. At one point, she says that she had heard searchers but didn't know their names, so she couldn't call back. On another occasion, she did call, but nobody heard her. One last point I want to make is something that I'm not really sure comes through on these videos. There's a distinct pattern in the so-called case summary sections. They don't summarize anything, it's just Paulides trying to make things seem mysterious. But the point I want to make is this. In cases where a missing person is found dead, such as Lloyd Hockett, David Paulides goes on a tangent about how this person should not have died, or that something nefarious must have happened and killed this person. However, in cases such as this one, where the missing person is found alive, the case summary tends to go in this strange direction where Paulides is borderline complaining that the person was found, or at the very least is incredulous that the person was able to survive so well. It's jarring to me that he can flip-flop between saying a 9-year-old should know better and should have been able to survive, and also there's no way that this 8-year-old should have been able to find food, water, and shelter. Like, even if I wasn't looking into these cases, so I didn't know how wrong the majority of them are, this would still be a red flag for me. But anyway, this video is getting long, so let's hurry up. Willard Eugene Jones Jr. Willard, who was 3 years old at the time, went missing on January 17th, 1959 from near Lebanon, Missouri. Willard was out with his brother as he did his chores, but wandered off and his brother left him alone. A search was launched including thousands of people, but it was hampered by icy rain that hit the area almost immediately after he had disappeared. Soldiers searching the dense woods 8 days after Willard had gone missing found his body just over 2¼ miles from his home. The area was so densely wooded they had to call for directions on how to get back. The autopsy showed that Willard had died from exposure, likely just 24 hours after he had gone missing. Let's proceed. I don't know why Mr. Paulides feels it's necessary to twist the truth about the weather. I know it's a big part of the Missing 411 mythos, where bad weather immediately rolls in following a disappearance. But I don't know why. Like, what's the point? What's he trying to say? But that's what's wrong with this particular case. The icy rain hit the area 2 days later, which is hardly what I would consider to be immediately after he goes missing. Larry Dwayne Krebs. Dwayne, who was 2 years old at the time, went missing on March 30th, 1988 from Lake Texoma, Oklahoma. He was walking just 8 paces behind his father and 50 feet from the water when his dad turned around and he was gone. There was no splash or noise. A set of child's footprints went off to a puddle but did not come back out. A psychic 15 years later was contacted by Dwayne's father. The psychic said that he had been abducted. Let's review. Dwayne went missing in 1980. This is a good place to point out that the last few sections have had a lot of typos. For instance, instead of behavior, bear-havior, and wolf with an E instead of just like the animal wolf, as well as several misprinted dates. I know that this one is misprinted because earlier in the case summary at the very beginning of this section, there's a list of the cases and dates. And this is one that is correctly listed there, but incorrectly listed here. So it's just baffling. There's so many errors like that, but let's continue. I think that Pleiades got the 50 feet number from the Charlie Project, but the newspapers at the time all seemed to report 15 feet, not 50. And the river was noted to have swelled substantially due to rains and was higher and faster than normal. I didn't see anything about there not being a splash or a noise, but I also didn't see anything to contradict that, so it's fine. I think I've made it pretty clear in my previous videos how unreliable psychics tend to be, though again, I obviously don't have concrete proof that this particular psychic is incorrect. It's entirely possible. So I would humbly ask, what's more likely? That he tripped and fell into the river and his father didn't hear anything? Or that somebody managed to sneak up and abduct him when he was 15 feet from the river and 8 paces behind his father? And further, this entity which had abducted him didn't leave any footprints, unless we're trying to say that it's a child ran up and abducted him. There's so many issues with saying that he was abducted that I don't know how you could possibly believe that. But let's move on to the next case. Ernest Matthew Cook. Ernest, who was 27 at the time, went missing on April 22nd, 1999 from another place I have no chance of pronouncing correctly. I'm going to guess Bash, Oklahoma. He was last seen by his father, who had dropped him off at his camper in the woods. His father came to check on him the next day, but Ernest was not there. His overnight bag, shoes, and other belongings were inside the camper. 2 days later, his father returned with Ernest's grandfather and both searched the area. 200 yards from his camper in a pasture, they found Ernest's sleeping bag and pillow. On the other side of the pasture was a road where they found a barefoot track and a boot track. Ernest's father said that he does not believe that Ernest left the camper willingly. This case is correct, as far as I can see. There was a recent update though. In 2012, Ernest's body was identified. He had been a John Doe since he was hit by a train in May of 1999. It is speculated that he was on his way to see his ex-wife and 2 daughters, though that doesn't explain much of the other evidence. Since this update occurred on the same year that the book was published, I don't feel that I can mark this as an inaccuracy, so let's just move on. Gloria McDonald. Gloria, who was 68 at the time, went missing on January 26, 2001 from Queen Wilhelmina State Park, Arkansas. Gloria was spending the day with her husband, Daniel, her son, Sean, and her son's girlfriend, Erin. The area was muddy due to a recent storm. About 250 yards down the trail, Gloria decided that hiking just wasn't for her, and she opted to go back to the gift shop alone, where she would meet the rest of the group. The group continued on for about 30 minutes before turning around and going to meet Gloria. She wasn't at the gift shop, and it looked as though she hadn't made it to the car. A search was launched, but she was never found. Law enforcement focused on her husband, Daniel, despite that they had all been in a group together this whole time. Let's review. The case appears in newspapers at the time how it is written in Missing 411. I know, 2 in a row, that's amazing. I do want to add some context though, since again, Paulides is making police sound like idiots for focusing on Gloria's husband. Consider the following. Gloria's own daughter said that if somebody did abduct her, she would have been so mouthy that they would have killed her. Daniel, Gloria's husband, said in a police interview that there's no way that somebody abducted her for her body because Gloria, quote, couldn't be considered pretty, close quote. Daniel said that he was going to move back to Florida less than a week after Gloria disappeared. The only people who ever saw Gloria on that day were the 3 people on the trail. They took pictures while on the hike, but none of them contained Gloria. Given the above, wouldn't you look into these people? Let's move on. Christopher L. Jones. Chris, who was 37 at the time, went missing on April 5th, 2006 from Holland, Arkansas. Chris was recovering from a gout flare-up at the time, for which he had just returned from the hospital. He was still using crutches. His family came to visit and found his front door closed but not locked, and his crutches were inside. His vehicle was still in the driveway, and nothing was moved or stolen. Chris's daughter died in a car accident 3 months later. Chris didn't show up for her funeral. Paulides says that gout would have prevented him from walking out on his own. Everything in Missing 411 correlates with what I was able to find online, but there was one important omission. Chris suffered from chronic alcoholism and had suffered from 2 heart attacks in the decade before his disappearance. Gout, if you don't know, is exacerbated by alcohol. If crippling pain in his legs didn't convince him to quit, I don't know what would. That said, he may have well been used to the pain. Colchicine, which is used in the treatment of gout, is very effective and can reduce the swelling and joint pain rapidly. Given this, I think it's entirely possible that he figured he would get around a little without the crutches. Also noteworthy is that he was having financial problems due to medical bills and lack of health insurance. These omissions are important in hindsight because in 2012, Chris's remains were found about 200 yards from his house. There were no signs of foul play. The last cases in this section of the book are for the Jamison family. This case has been covered many, many times by many, many other people, even outside of the Missing 411 community. If you are unaware, the remains of the Jamison family were located in 2013, but no cause of death was determined, and the circumstances of their disappearance is still strange. If you're interested, feel free to check it out on your own. There are lots of videos on it, but I'm going to skip this one. Thank you very much for watching and for sticking with me to the end of this longer video. Paulides did better in this chapter, especially towards the end. Granted, that is because most of these cases are only proved to be inaccurate after 2012, but, credit where credit's due. The chapter summary in the book doesn't have anything worth examining, so for the sake of time and sanity, we're going to call it here. Please join me next time when we examine the cases from Alabama and Georgia. Until then, take care.